Here is another recently extinct animal that you may or may not have known existed, the heath hen. This is the heath hen. It was a subspecies of the greater prairie chicken, which is a type of grouse. It used to be found along the eastern coast of North America from around New Hampshire all the way down to the Virginias and a couple islands off the coast of that area as well. Now, these guys were first discovered when the Pilgrims landed on the east coast of North America, and they were one of the most abundant game birds that were found there, and they were even more abundant than things like turkeys or deer or other food animals. There were a lot of these guys. So, since they were so abundant and made for very good eating, they were hunted a lot, with pretty much zero regulations or restrictions on the amount of birds that you could actually hunt. This overhunting, combined with things like habitat loss due to settlements and fires, as well as predation by things like introduced rats and feral cats, caused the population of the heath hen to decline rapidly, and by the late 1800s, there were very few individual populations left. Most of these populations were contained to offshore islands where settlers and invasive species hadn't quite reached yet. By the 1920s, there were less than 100 individuals left, and most of them were contained to small islands such as Martha's Vineyard off the coast of Massachusetts. Now, what's interesting is that the heath hen was one of the very first birds that were officially protected and tried to have actual concerted conservation efforts in the United States. Hunting was banned for the remaining heath hens, however, it wasn't very well enforced and poachers still could get at the remaining individuals. There were areas that were protected under a heath hen reserve, and there were captive breeding efforts established, however, they weren't very good and thus were pretty much ineffective. Additionally, there were just a couple series of very bad luck unfortunate events such as accidental forest fires, accidental flooding, and the movement of predatory species such as goshawks into the tried-to-be-conserved area. A lot of these factors could not have been predicted or controlled, such as the forest fires, so really a lot of the conservation efforts failed due to just bad management as well as bad luck. Despite the somewhat early conservation efforts, by 1928 there was only one individual remaining. His name was Booming Ben, and unfortunately he did pass away. And with him, the populations of heath hens did go extinct. However, modern efforts have established that the heath hen could potentially be a good candidate for de-extinction. There is a good number of preserved specimens of heath hens that could have enough viable DNA to allow them to be reintroduced via cloning with the greater prairie chicken. The heath hen was a subspecies of greater prairie chicken, and while it was genetically distinct enough to be its own subspecies, there is a possibility that cloning the preserved DNA from these taxidermy specimens into the DNA of the greater prairie chicken could reestablish a population of the heath hen.